Good evening and welcome to another episode of Reality Check Podcast. Tonight I am joined by Twisted Steel and Sex Appeal Marcus, by Raul from Miami, and I'm Carlos. Tonight's topic is NATO feels the pressure from both sides. To use an analogy, I'm going to use the panino, and for you perfectionists, it's panino is one, panini is multi. It's an Italian word. So they're like the panino. They are NATO is the inside, the cheese, the meat, whatever, and then on each side they're being pressed. One side they're being pressed by us. The other side they're being pressed by their occupied populations. Why is NATO denying us the right to fly on airfields that we have built in their country with our money that protects their sorry asses? They do it. They deny it because they're scared shitless of the infestation of Islamic jihadists that they have in there that are outbreeding, outvoting, and making them a caliphate, and they become emboldened every year. Is that harsh? Yeah, it's harsh. Is it reality? Hell yeah, it's reality. That's why they're afraid. Trump has been plugging away. This trip apparently is mostly about getting them to up the GDP. And it's ironic that the Baltic states and Poland, who are all former communist satellites, are ponying up. Now, admittedly, they have a smaller GDP. So 5% of a smaller GDP is still a percentage, regardless. Might be a little easier to cough up than a country like Germany. Even Germany, I've been reading, is slowly stepping up. As I recall, Spain is the worst offender, but hey, it's Spain. What do you expect? They're fighting out about dialects. We speak Catalan, we speak Castilian. They're a lost cause. They're full of shit. But we also, and the Great Britain is not doing much either. And France, I don't know. I'm going to talk about France later because apparently that bogus lawfare they pulled on Marine Le Pen, that shit's gone. Marine Le Pen, I think, has been cleared to run, which has got to scare the hell out of the frou-frous over there in France. Marcus, how do you see the pressure of NATO and how that the effect it would have on NATO with Trump going over there as he now is in Ankara?
Well, I guess we have to describe what NATO is and in terms of relationship. Even though it's been in existence for 77 years and there's 32 members, it's been described as an unhealthy codependent relationship with the U.S., where uh, the member countries relied on the U.S. for everything, and having troops, buying their arms, their logistics, their communication, their defense systems, their military contractors. But what it did is it allowed some of these countries to expand their socialism while cutting down their military and NATO obligations. So because our military became their their uh, their proxy army, so to speak.
Your
So
bodyguard.
yeah, so like you get Germany, you get UK. They have universal health care. They have uh, education that they could really focus on, but at the sacrifice of their military. And what it showed later on, especially with the Trump presidency, how fragile it is when Trump says, "Well, if you don't increase your obligations, your mandatory obligations, I'm going to leave, or the U.S. is going to leave." And then you get other things that stress the realities of NATO commitment, namely the war in Ukraine, the issue with Iran, and among other things. So there's been a variety of summits, just say uh, from the onset of Trump presidency, on how to disengage their dependence on the U.S. They're calling it NATO 3.0, and but it's really hard to because they don't have the manufacturing base as Turkey. And the thing is, this codependency, they're relying on like U.S. command and control, integrated missile defense, air-to-air refueling, strategic airlift, space-based intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Uh, and these European countries, they don't have that. They don't even have a domestic a military industrial base to draw from. So for the U.S. to disengage, which is should be gradual while focusing on the Indo-Pac China area, it's going to take some time. But every summit is like it's almost like a business plan where these countries go to the meeting, like where are you at now on this? And the thing about the war in Ukraine, it shows the vulnerability of their stockpiles and their productivity capability, how everything kind of got dwindled down to like critical levels just to resupply Ukraine. And I, I guess that's a good starting point on how I look at things right now.
Before I go to you, Raul, Marcus just mentioned a bunch of things where they spend on socialism. The only thing I didn't hear, and obviously we know it's there, they're spending a lot of money on handouts to these people, these immigrants, illegal, but whatever you want to call them, open borders. That cost a shitload of money. Look what it was costing, still costing us here. Look at all the fraud we're finding and everything else. Never mind just legitimate expenditures for those people. That costs a lot of money to let a bunch of freeloaders come into your country. So that's another pressure on them. What do you think of the notion that Trump can only threaten, and maybe NATO knows that we really can't leave, because if we leave, it's going to open the door to Russia and China? Anything on that you want to take up?
I think that's the big fear for Europe, and particularly for the head of NATO, this Mark Rutte, I think his name is. And what Marcus just described was absolutely correct. I mean, if you think about Europe, and it's most of the countries are quote unquote social democratic states, right? They have a very generous safety net, a lot of welfare benefits. The French take the entire month of August off for vacation. Everybody has very generous pension benefits. But the cost of that is, number one, people pay a shitload of taxes in Europe compared to what we pay over here, right? I mean, we actually have it, pretty easy, right? But they are taxing the hell out of their people.
And no air conditioning.
Yeah, and on top of that, like take a country like Germany. Germany basically has been sacrificing its production of cheap energy at the altar of climate change. So they got rid of their mining, their coal mines. They deactivated their nuclear power plants, and as a result, right now in Germany, electricity prices are through the roof.
Yes.
So the big industrial enterprises like BMW, Mercedes, all these companies are the big industrial machinery manufacturers. They're all complaining about the fact that it's just gotten too expensive to continue to manufacture in Germany, which means that, quite frankly, more and more of those jobs are probably going to be exported here. BMW has a huge factory in Greenville, South Carolina, and the Spartanburg area, Spartanburg area, and they produce practically all of BMW's SUVs for the global market, in South Carolina. Well, I think you're going to see even more of that coming to the U.S. because they really are committing economic ritual suicide, seppuku, that's what these guys are doing. And if you look at, Marcus also alluded to the immigration, right? They've opened up their borders. Why? Well, because number one, all the chaos in the Middle East, some of which, we helped to sort of foment, right? But, look at the turmoil in Syria, right? Initially, all those refugees in Syria, most of them crossed over into Jordan. Well, guess what? Jordan's a small country. I mean, they really can't handle a huge influx of refugees indefinitely, no matter how much money the UN sent their way. Eventually, they had to sort of, figure out what to do with these people. And the solution was to let them go to Europe, You've got a lot of poverty in Northern Africa as well. You got these people, crossing over the Mediterranean into, Italy and Greece and places like that, and then working their way up to places like Germany, because Germany is the industrial powerhouse of Europe. It is, where the jobs are located, okay, where all the money's to be made. So that's how come so many of these people end up in Germany. Spain right now has a crazy sort of corrupt socialist government. They have, and in Spain and also in a lot of other countries, but in Spain in particular, like half the population works for the government, right? So the industrial sector is under enormous pressure. And the truth of the matter is that, I mean, Spain is, they basically said we can't meet, the 5% goal for defense spending for NATO, let alone the 3.5% that I think was being called for, right? And the NATO is going to find a way to sort of give them a pass, let them meet their commitments by 2030 or something, and they're doing a lot of shell games, right? So if you are investing in an interstate highway, okay, for your country, they're claiming, well, that's actually a defense spending that goes towards your 5%, because that highway could be used in times of war to, move supplies and things of this sort. So they're playing games. Okay, the only serious country, or the serious countries that are in Europe right now are, Poland
and the Baltics,
Hungary.
Hungary. I mean, it's the Eastern European countries and some of the Baltic states that are really, they really understand that, this is for real. But I think, again, getting back to what Marcus said, I mean, for the longest time, NATO was an easy alliance for the Europeans because, Big Brother was there. Big Brother had all those assets and capabilities that, Marcus alluded to, strategic bombers, refuelers, interceptors, air defense interceptors, all that stuff, which they didn't have to invest in. And now they have to invest in it. And now they've got a war on their continent, on their doorstep, in the form of Ukraine, okay? And Ukraine, which, I mean, I remember it wasn't that long ago, a year and a half ago, everybody was saying, oh my God, Ukraine's going to lose this war, okay?
They're on their knees.
Yeah, and guess what? They have proven all of their critics completely wrong, okay? I never gave up on them, quite frankly. I always thought that, these guys would pull it off. Why? Because they don't have an option, man. They don't have a choice, right? I mean, for them, it's, survival or die.
And it's with drones. They're doing it with drones.
Right. What they have done in terms of, shifting the warfare to become, sort of drone warfare, and they're producing millions and millions of drones on an annual basis. They've got their entire industry, focused on producing, more and more drones, bigger and longer range drones, and they're using it to incredible effect, not just on the battlefield, but now they're, attacking targets deep into Russia.
Oil.
I saw something today where, they basically destroyed like 8 cargo ships crossing from Russia, into Crimea, right from across the Black Sea. They're like, they're causing havoc in Russia and in Crimea. And I think Putin is running out of options, man. He's going to have to figure out what to do, because, he's under an enormous amount of pressure. The Russians are now feeling the effects of the war for the very first time.
$9 a gallon gas,
Yeah,
lines,
long lines
fights.
at gas stations.
Well,
You know,
Marcus, I know you wanted to weigh in a little while back. Well, go ahead.
so Marcus.
No, you mentioned about like Spain, about the illegals. Being a former federal employee, that's a real cause of concern because that government is going to give legal residence to 500,000 people from Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. And the thing is, for the U.S., we honor Spanish passports. They're part of the EU. Their visas are fast tracked without even a second thought because they're Spanish citizens.
Yeah, which is
And
dangerous.
and that is for me like a big red flag because they don't know who they're vetting. We don't know who they're vetting, and then it becomes an issue. And that's just one thing. But another thing that's not that's kind of alluded to with the Ankara summit is Trump. He's a businessman, so everything is about getting the best deal, and we can't underestimate that NATO's reliance on the American product and the American system. The part of the Don Road doctrine, as mentioned before. So it's about buying military goods, relying on U.S. contractors, U.S. Defense industry, but also the AI systems, like the software, the autonomous systems, on everything. But another thing that's also an issue, a talking point, is the Strait of the Hormuz, the Greenland, Denmark issue, and Trump contemplating on selling F-35s to Turkey.
Yeah, I wouldn't be selling them to Turkey. I would not. I think maybe he's just waving it out like a carrot. But Turkey, remember that went sour when Turkey bought Russian anti-aircraft air defense systems, and they were concerned about that. With Spain, yeah, Spain is going to get inundated. Spain and France are competing to see who can bend over the furthest and spread them. Basically, myself, I would not vacation in Spain. They don't even like tourists. I mean, they're lining up by cruise ships when the people get out for like a port visit, an excursion, and it was just water pistols. They're yelling shit at people and squirting them with water pistols, to leave the country. In Barcelona, for example, I'm sorry, but I don't need to visit a country with that attitude. I'd probably go to Portugal, but I wouldn't go to Spain. Again, just my choice. I like to vote with my dollars. I don't like to go to a country that says we'll take your tourist money, but fuck you. Which is why also I don't vacation in New England, and maybe that's a pettiness on my part, but it irks me to go to a place like Vermont, spend my hard-earned money there, and have Vermont basically keep someone like Bernie Sanders in office and support Marxism. Looking at but anyway, I want to get back to Turkey. Erdogan is a dictator. He's been in office for. We just looked it up
2019, 2018, 2019.
Yeah, no more than that.
Well, he was president 2018-19. He was the prime minister before then.
Yeah, so he's a career politician. I think we need him because of the basis and because maybe he's a buffer between some of the other Middle East, and we need them to stay there. I mean, Turkey to me has been. I had a person tell me, a colleague and friend, who actually is married to a Turkish lady, and he said, "No, you got it all wrong, bro. The only reason that people in America don't like Erdogan is because he won't kiss America's ass." Well, Raul, you talked earlier about all these things that these countries were getting away with in NATO. That's because we had weak U.S. presidents. We had Obama. We had even in Trump's first term, he wasn't really able to go full tilt on him because he was fighting all kinds of lawfare and COVID. But we had Biden, we had Obama. God forbid if we'd had Harris, and he's making them pony up. And they're, and on one hand, I think they're we're gonna call your bluff, Donnie. We don't think you're gonna leave because if you do, then Russia's going to come in. But who's fucked if Russia comes in? Not us, them. The other thing you mentioned about companies.
Keep in mind, the reason they're having that meeting in Turkey is because Turkey is a NATO member, right?
Oh, I know.
And by the way, Turkey has, I believe, the largest land army of NATO, right?
Yes.
And look, say what you will about Turkey or Erdogan, and I don't particularly care for the guy. You're right. I mean, he's been in power forever and ever. He really is just an authoritarian strongman who's managed to remain in power. And a good friend of mine was born in Turkey, and I've had long conversations with him about what's going on with Erdogan, and why is he appeasing now the Muslims, where before he was secular, and this guy basically said, look, this is all just politics, domestic Turkish politics, that he's playing one group off against another and trying to keep a lid on things. But Turkey is literally at the crossroads between Western Europe and the Middle East. It is a very large country with a big industrial base, a high birth rate. I remember years ago when there was that I forget that book that came out. Some strategic analysts wrote this book about who are going to be the big players of politics in the 21st century, and at the top of that list was Turkey, right? Just because of its geographic position, its influence, the fact that it's a member of NATO, the fact that it, but the problem with Erdogan right now is. And I heard Trump saying that they're going to lift the sanctions, but I don't think he's going to give them F-35s. I hope he doesn't give them F-35s.
Yes, I hope he also.
John lately has been, in a very nasty sort of verbal spat with the Israelis, which is kind of odd because several years ago they were actually on good terms, but for whatever reason, again, maybe he's playing to his domestic audience, whatever, and he has to take a strong tone towards Israel. But the Israelis are not. I think Netanyahu is going to put a lot of pressure on Trump and say, "Listen, don't do this. You're really going to cause major problems with us if this guy ever does decide to go to war with us." I think that would be very problematic. So look, it's a very dangerous world we're living in right now. I mean, things are very, you got that situation in Ukraine, you've got Iran, you've got Turkey, sort of picking a beef now with Israel. You've got the Greeks. Okay, remember the island of Cyprus is basically split in two, right? I mean, the Turks invaded it, I think, back in the 60s or something, and seized, half of Cyprus, right? So the Greeks have always been pissed off at the Turks for doing that.
Armenians too.
Immigration, the Chinese, trying to influence everybody and stake their claim to, being a global power.
Turkey shot down a Russian fighter jet. Remember that when Turkey shot down a Russian fighter jet?
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago, as I recall.
Yeah, I think maybe.
Yeah.
Raul, you were talking earlier about companies.
World War III.
Companies coming here from Europe. Case in point, and this is nothing recent. Years and years and years ago, I bought a Glock 17, and wonderful firearm. And then I looked at it and it says Glock, whatever, model set, 17, 9mm. Then I see Brunswick, Georgia.
Yeah.
And that was ages ago. And I'm sure, knowing what you know about that topic, I'm sure you're familiar with a Turkish company called Century Arms.
Yeah. No. Listen, and here in Miami, we have a company called SAR USA, which stands for Sazimal, which is actually one of the largest Turkish arms manufacturers. They now have a big warehouse and distribution center here in Miami, right in Doral. I know the guy who runs it. He's actually, I think the grandson of the founder of the company's been making arms since the Ottoman Empire, and now they're selling a lot of handguns and other shotguns and stuff here in the U.S. But Turkey's always been a big producer of armaments. They have a very sophisticated armaments business. I mean, they
And
were the
drones
ones
now.
that developed these sort of inexpensive unmanned aerial UAVs and stuff. The Israelis started copying what we were doing with those Reaper drones and stuff, and Turkey and Israel both started making sort of more inexpensive versions of them, and they developed a whole market around them. So it's just a big, powerful country. You got to deal with them. They're a NATO member. They do in fact have that Incirlik, the U.S.
leverage
that has had nuclear weapons stored there for a long period of time. And I think, look, I don't know what's going to come out of this meeting. What I'm hearing on the news reports is that Trump is basically calling them unreliable allies, and we built these bases, and we shed all this blood on the European continent. He's laying a real guilt trip on them, right?
on the other members, but not on Turkey.
I heard Georgia, Georgia Maloney's answer was, yes, we understand all that, okay, but keep in mind that these bases that are on our soil are the use of them are negotiated, and this is actually true. A very lengthy document called the Status of Forces Agreement between the host country and the United States that spells out how and when we can use the bases and everything related to them. And Georgia Maloney says, look, these are your bases, yes, but you're in our sovereign territory, and we don't want you dragging us into a war that we don't want to get involved in. And she said, at the end of the day, I'm the prime minister of Italy, and we don't want to get dragged into a war. This is just I'm telling you what she said. I saw the interview, right? We don't want to get dragged into a war, with Iran by letting you use our bases to strike targets in Iran, right? So
then why have the bases? Why have the bases if that's the case? Why keep them there?
No, listen, because the bases were supposedly there, okay, for use by the U.S. In the event of Russian invasion of NATO, right? But over the years that has evolved because, for example, every soldier that was wounded in Iran or Afghanistan was from the theater. They were airlifted to Germany, to our military hospital in Germany, right? At
Ramstein, I think.
At Ramstein, right? And then from there they would go to Walter Reed in D.C. So those bases have proved not just useful for NATO but for other activities, right? I listen. I tend to side with the president, okay, but I also understand that at the end of the day, our bases are in a sovereign territory, okay, and if it's better. Those are disputes that are best resolved behind closed doors. If in fact we're allies, we should be having these public spats. And by the way, apparently Trump is now also at this conference in Turkey, brought up the issue of Greenland again, saying once again that he wants Greenland. And that has people just like, the Europeans are just like really, foaming at the mouth over that, right? So
why Greenland? I think at the end of the day,
I think at the end of the day, there may be during this administration a real break between the U.S. and NATO. Okay, I hope to God that after Trump is out of office, that the next president finds a way to, quite frankly, calm the waters and figure out a reasonable way to deal with our European allies. I'm not ready to write off our European allies that have been our allies for since the end of World War II. I think it's important to be on the side of countries that are democracies. Even though they're social democracies, whatever. I mean, I don't know.
But
I'm not ready to
allies,
sign them off. Write them off.
allies, you know what? Allies got to act like allies. I don't think they're acting like allies. I think they think they have Trump over a barrel, and because they had our other presidents. Marcus, I know you wanted to chime in on this.
You know, Raul made a good point about Maloney of Italy about the status of forces agreement. One of her responses is like, "Hey, I had to let Parliament vote on it. I can't do it." So in Parliament, you get communists, you get a wide faction of representation, but you know that is a potential hangup there, and to blame it on the Prime Minister of Italy, I don't. I mean, I see your point. You know, it is their land, their airspace. So, but
And by the way, that she's very popular in Italy. You know, she commands a lot of respect, and you know, she made a very compelling argument, and she basically told Trump. I mean, she was never ever disrespectful, okay, but she made it very clear to Trump. She says, "Listen, I am the prime minister of Italy first and foremost, okay? And I have to look out for my country's best interests, okay? And yes, you know, you are, you know, a great president. You know, we love, you know, your bases here. But, you know, we do not, you know, my people do not want to be dragged into a war, okay? That we knew nothing about until the war. I mean, you know, we had very little notice that you guys were actually going to war, right? I mean, so whatever. I mean, you know, she's a smart lady. You know, she made a compelling argument, right? And I think, look, man, Trump is changing the world in a very fundamental way. I think, you know, generally speaking, for the better. But he's breaking a lot of things in the process. Okay, he's turned over a lot of tables. Okay, he's like the bull in the proverbial china shop. Okay, he's breaking a lot of shit in order to get his way, which I think at the end of the day will be good for the U.S. and good for the world. Okay,
Yes.
but I think once he's out of office, okay, when his term expires, the next president, whether it's a J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio or somebody else, you know, I think it just behooves this country in the long run, you know, decades from now, to have a relationship with you. Because the other thing I was reading the Wall Street Journal, the Europeans are now, you know, they don't trust Trump at all, and they want to. They realize now that they're you know, the cord, the umbilical cord is being cut, okay, and now, you know, they are adopting their own very much isolationist policies. They don't want to have to deal with, you know, big American tech companies. They don't want to have to deal with, you know, American suppliers. You know, so from a trade perspective, you know, they are now starting to take the same attitude that Trump took about America first. Well, now the Europeans are doing the same thing. Like, okay, fine, you want to be America first? We're going to be Europeans first. And, you know, fuck Google and fuck, you know, Microsoft. And, you know, we set the rules here. And, you know, we're going to, you know, encourage our own technology companies and not yours. And we're going to encourage our own farmers, and we're going to encourage our own energy production, which, you know, they're turning the playbook on Trump. So
Until Putin turns it on them and Xi Jinping. Yes, Marcus.
well, what Raul kind of hinted at posits an interesting dynamic, which is this bipolar attitude. So you get like countries who are expressing their own self-interest, like Italy, UK, France, and Germany, but then they're part of NATO, and there's NATO obligations and priorities. And the leader of NATO, he basically said our number two priorities right now is Russia with Ukraine and securing the Strait of Hormuz. So it's like they don't want, so as a state they don't want to commit to Iran, but under NATO they're obligated to secure
right.
the oil channel. So that it's like a bipolar schizophrenic.
It is. And you know something, Marcus, this could all change overnight. I mean, think for a second, and I know that, doesn't come up that often, but I mean, let's suppose that tomorrow, Putin is assassinated, right? Or the Russian people, in 6 months from now, they're starved of gasoline and there's a lot of, turmoil, and there's some sort of, a coup d'etat, and I mean, that could very well happen. Okay. Maybe a year or 2 or 3 years down the road, Russia is, I mean, it's kind of a long shot still, I think, but it could eventually be friendly to Europe, right? I mean, they could change their evil ways.
So could Iran.
We had an opportunity after the fall of the Soviet Union.
They did, and they were running for a while until Putin came to power and decided that, no, he wanted to reestablish, because he had a chip on his shoulder. He was a KGB agent. He saw the glories of, in his eyes, of the Soviet Union collapse, and he wanted to rebuild a very strong Russia. And I think the Russian people supported him in that, because they're very nationalistic and identify with their own culture and stuff, and they wanted.
Look at him now.
Look at him now. To be, respected again. They didn't want to be a bit player on the world stage, and they still had nuclear weapons. So, but I think there's I just think I mean, I'm not going to live to see, the outcome of all this stuff, but I mean, I think the 21st century is going to be proved to be very interesting times, perhaps even more interesting than the ones that we've lived in our lifetimes, in terms of societal changes and wars and turmoil and stuff. I hope it's for the better. Okay. But who knows, right? I think Trump right now, his priority, and I think it's the right priority, is to make sure that the U.S. can confront China economically and militarily, and not fall into second place. I think that's Trump's primordial objective these days. And I also, I also believe that he's absolutely petrified that with Iran, he was petrified about those nuclear weapons, right? So that's why he keeps insisting there's under no conditions is Iran going to have a nuclear weapon. I think that's great too. So, and he has an understanding with Putin. I think Putin's not going to dare to launch tactical nukes or any other nukes so long as Trump is in power.
Right, and that's the thing. It's only another couple of years. I'm just wondering, this trip over there. I also agree, and I don't think he should sell the F-35s to Turkey. So what's going to happen when Erdogan finds out, ends up with egg on his face, because the guy came over here, I kissed his ass, I rolled out the blue carpet, I had the honor guards, all the pomp and circumstance, and he left, and I got no F-35s. He loses face.
Yeah, but he's thrown he's thrown a bone his way by getting rid of some sanctions that were still in place against Turkey, dating back years. I forget what the argument was about back then, but he's and I think what Trump might do is, because I think there's if I'm not mistaken, Congress passed some legislation a while back that prohibited the sale of F-35s to Turkey. So yeah. Trump cannot unilaterally. He's going to have Congress change that, and I think Trump's
not going to happen.
Trump can basically say, "Hey, look, I tried my best to get the F-35s approved in Congress, but we have limited control, and the Democrats wouldn't allow us to do it, and it's not entirely up to Trump to do that, and he might use that to his benefit to maintain."
He's going to do a Maloney,
Erdogan, and blame it on Congress instead of taking the rap for it.
Yeah, he's going to do a Georgia Maloney. Oh, I would love to, but I'm hindered by my Congress. Yes, Marcus.
So under Trump, we have like a brigade force of like 4,500 in Lithuania. He's talking about putting like another shifting some assets from Germany to Poland, which I think is a good idea because Germany's too dependent on U.S. military. they need to forcibly reassess their socialism pretty much and be more independent militarily. But one question I have is since the U.S. wants to focus in the Indo-Pac, we had a CETO, which is like a NATO, and that
Mhm.
got dissolved in 1977. Uh, is it possible to reconstitute a CETO to counter China, or is it impractical because China is a major trading partner and it's kind of entwined with the economies of other countries like Japan?
Japan especially has skin in the game. And by the way, getting back to what Raul was saying, Europe is in those situations they're in, but Europe needs the strait to flow to move the traffic and the oil far more than we do because German industry without oil is screwed.
Yeah.
Is kaput, to put it the way they would say it. So yeah, if they need it more than us, and I think that's a leverage that Trump can use to our advantage. You guys don't want to fight for to keep the strait open. You don't want to send ships. You don't want to send minesweepers. Good luck with the fuel lines and the high price of petrol.
Yeah. Look, I know what you're saying, Marcus. I don't see another alliance like that cropping up. But we definitely have obviously very strong relationships with Japan, with South Korea, although that's become a little bit testy over these tariffs and stuff of late. Okay.
Philippines, Taiwan.
The Philippines, Singapore, and most importantly, Australia. So the U.S. in terms of that Pacific strategy, they've been looking to beef up, the American presence in places like Australia, in Guam, okay, which
India.
is like it's in the region, but it's not that close to China. I mean, they could still be, I guess, hit with ballistic missiles or something, but they're not, they're close, but not too close. And I don't know. I got a nephew who's a Navy EOD officer. He seems to constantly be in the Philippines for some reason, So we're sending a lot of guys over to the Philippines. That's for sure. Japan has, especially now under this new prime minister, they are rearming. Okay, they are taking the threat of China very seriously. Okay, and they are really starting to build things up. And I read a great article the other day about Taiwan, okay, written by an American strategic analyst, saying, listen, man, the Chinese, they keep that sword rattling, and the amphibious forces that they're going to launch to take over Taiwan and those threats. But he went in a very detailed fashion, sort of explaining how incredibly difficult it would be for China to take over Taiwan. I mean, Taiwan is literally armed to the teeth, right? And so I think it's not a done deal by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, China is alluding to having they want to control the entire South China Sea, but again, look at what makes you think that in 10 years time or 15 years time we could be looking at a different situation in China. They've got their own economic problems.
Big time. And Trump has kicked them out of the Panama Canal. He's kicked them out of the strait. He has been cutting their leash, shortening their leash. They don't have that, and their industry there, as you mentioned, a large industrial power. They need for the same reason the Germans do. They needed much more so. They need that petroleum. Marcus, you wanted to weigh in there.
Now, also, in less than a generation, China's going to be aged out. They have a small window to make the Taiwan a reality. But the thing is, I'm curious about the article you read, Raul. You mentioned about a conflict.
Dig it up and I'll send it to you. But one of the things this guy was saying was, there's only so much beachhead where the Chinese can land.
No, I
Okay,
know, but my take
and,
is there's one way.
and for them that's going to be like Normandy, right? And then some, because these guys have incredible air defenses. You know, the Taiwanese, you know, they have very sophisticated air defenses. They have, you know, mountainous terrain.
Yep.
You know, try dropping paratroops into Taiwan. That's going to be good luck with that, right? I mean,
Target practice.
this author was just kind of going through amphibious assault, you know, dropping paratroopers there. You know, I mean, just went through a whole bunch of stuff about how you would actually take control of the island without obliterating it completely, right? Because
Well, the best way to do it is like
taking it over, right? I mean,
the best way to do it is siege warfare, you know. But I mean, surround the island and make it a revisitation of the Cuban Missile Crisis with the Burley airlift. Try to make it cost prohibitive and starve them out, and to give China the legitimacy where they didn't fire the first shot. You know, like Civil War.
Yep.
So, you know, that's
well,
my
look,
take.
like I said, it's a complicated world. It's a dangerous world. You know, it's funny when we have these conversations how we're focused on, you know, what we think is going to happen with Putin and all these people that are in the picture right now. Erdogan, these guys are old. You know, they're old geezers like me, man, or older. Right, and so. These guys are not going to be around, you know, 5-10 years from now. There's going to be somebody different's going to be, you know, and Trump's not going to be around, right? I mean, 2-3 years from now, things could be very different than the scenario that we're looking at right now. And I think it's important to sort of keep that in mind. And again, I don't have a crystal ball, but I'm just saying, you know, it's predicting what's going to happen is, I mean, not that it was ever easy, but, you know, I just think that with all the turmoil going on, the fact that you got all these aging leaders, the fact that Trump is going to be turned out, you know, in the next 2 years, the fact that look what happened in England now, right? So, you know, Keir Starmer is now out, right? So what's going to happen in England now, right? I mean, you know, the Brits are fed up with the whole immigration thing. So I think Europe it took a while, but I think they're starting to realize that that Trump was right.
Yeah, they'll never admit it, but their actions.
Trump was right about everything, right? Trump was right about everything. And well, look, this is not new. Remember when he went there when Merkel was there? He said, "You guys are nuts. What are you doing building an oil and, you know, natural gas pipelines with Russia when, you know, and in the meantime, we're here to defend you from Russia. What the fuck are you guys doing?" Right? I mean, you're making all this money with cheap Russian oil and natural gas, and yet you want us to spend billions and billions and billions protecting you from Russia? That doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, literally, that was Trump's argument when he first met with Merkel. Like, what the hell is going on here? Why are we writing these huge checks every year to pay for NATO, and you're out there playing footsies with Putin, you know, Miss Merkel, right? So
one of the things we can do, as you mentioned, you're right that just bailing out on NATO and leaving the bases empty would not be good. But he can cut them. He can cut finances. He can cut the amount of people on those bases. He can make it so they can serve our purposes for what you said about wounded, about transport, about any other facilitation, but not stand around being their bodyguard.
Right.
I heard a comment tonight, Carl Higbee on Newsmax. He said, Europe is composed of 2 categories of countries whose asses we saved and countries whose asses we kicked to save the asses of the other countries.
That's true.
Which was pretty well put. So if Trump's trip over there was to, like you said, to tell NATO, get with the program, and he throws a little conciliatory crumb to Erdogan, and he leaves without the F-35s, I think that would be a successful trip. Maybe less is more.
Yeah. Meantime, let's see what happens with Iran, man, because now, you know, the bombs are falling again on Tehran. The economic sanctions are back on. Let's see what happens with oil prices. Like I said, I think Trump I think the oil markets are tired of all of this, and they're seeing that the tankers are flowing again, okay? And that every time that Iran tries to impede that flow, the U.S. is dropping the hammer on them big time, as they're doing right this moment, okay? So I think the oil markets are starting to figure out, well, wait a second, so long as, we were scared to do it before, but now we've proven we can get through. And yes, these guys are now sniping at us again, but Trump is responding, very forcefully. So maybe you've managed to keep a lid on those oil prices. I think that's what we got to sort of monitor, I think, over these next 48 hours or so,
Yeah, it's interesting that the two ships that prompted all this, there was one had LNG, and one was Qatari and the other Arab, but they were at the southern part. They were running through a southern channel, which apparently really pisses off Iran, because it makes it, I think it's a little more difficult for them to choose that little detour, to strike that little detour. But they did anyway, and basically they're getting. Do you think that Trump is just stalling, going completely medieval on them, just going completely ballistic on them until the midterms, and then after the midterms, as long as there's an IRGC alive, there will be no peace in the Middle East. Sorry, but there won't be. That's not negotiable.
I think to a certain extent he is. I think I think at the end of the day he realizes that these guys. So like you say, so long as the IRGC is in power, there's nothing to be negotiated with. It's going to continue to be a festering, wound for the entire world. And I think he's going to have to go back in. My fear is that he's going to go back in, but without troops on the ground, and it may just prolong things even more, right? Trump is trying to find a magic bullet to sort of win a war without losing a lot of bodies, a lot of American troops, and that's kind of in the fantasy world, right? I mean, it's you're dealing a huge country, 90 million people, and you're trying to get the people to revolt, get the IRGC to stand down. When you're dealing with fanatics, it's not an easy thing to unravel, right? So
yeah, but the regime will collapse quicker if he punishes the people. Now, I don't mean genocidal bombing, but I do mean cutting their energy, cutting their power, putting them literally in the dark ages. The regime, and I think they're panicking about that. What do you think about that, Marcus? That they're sounding over there the warning. If we don't watch out, this thing is going to collapse. Our economy is going to collapse.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't want to spend too much brain cells on that.
Well, actually, you're talking about Carl Higbee, Carlos. That's what he was saying. He was saying, listen, nobody wants to do it, right? I mean, nobody wants to start blowing up, power plants and having the civilian population, in darkness and stuff. Okay, but maybe that is what is required to get these guys to realize, look, they are literally going to bomb us back into the Stone Age, and we can't have 90 million of our fellow countrymen without food, without electricity, without light, and that will then maybe lead to a massive sort of revolt, right? Because and not to change the topic here, but I mean, look at what's happening in Cuba now, man. I mean, they are at wit's end.
It's the same thing. And by the way, the IRGC is also, it's not just the average, it's not Abdul with the grocery shop, grocery market, or the vendor. It's the IRGC is not getting paid. And no matter how loyal and how fanatic and how
and I think Cuba, man, I mean, I think the people there, I mean, They don't have electricity. They don't have lights. I mean, come on, man. I mean, really, how much
Well,
longer can people sort of put up with this shit, right? I mean,
so
it's
why
just,
can't we? But Cuba's been putting up with that for decades. But we need to do
yeah,
this.
yeah, but you know what? I think they realize now this is the end of the line because before they for the longest time they depended on on Russia, right? Then after the fall of the Soviet Union, they were lucky enough to find
Chávez.
Venezuela, came around and
Yes.
became their sugar daddy then, right? So Cuba has basically been living off of first the Russian sugar daddy, then the Venezuelan sugar daddy, and guess what? There are no longer any more sugar daddies.
Trump cut him.
Claudia Steinbaum wanted to send him some oil, and Trump told her, "Don't you fucking dare," right? Because we're gonna have a problem if you do, right? So
Yeah.
there is no other. There is no 911 coming to the rescue of Cuba. There is no. There isn't. The Chinese are not going to go in there, right? I mean, they're not going to make that mistake. I mean.
Mm-mm. No, I don't think so. I'm just going to speculate as we should probably start wrapping up here. I believe that it is the Dark Ages approach that Trump is going to use to drive them to desperation and collapse the regime. And I also think maybe if that doesn't work after the midterms, Trump may be willing to take, a few hundred casualties and go in there with land forces, take Kharg Island. That's important. He's been threatening to take Kharg Island. He hasn't done it. Secure it and take out what's left of the IRGC. That's my Let's go around the clock here. Marcus, any parting thoughts for tonight?
Well, I mean, with Iran, I always stand by the fact, well, an opinion that in order to really disrupt, you need to gain ground. In order to gain ground, you need troops, or arm the populace. I mean, CIA is well versed to like the OSS to provide like rat lines of supply and weapons, material, and
Or
personnel to
Mossad?
do that.
Is
To
Mossad also not equipped that way?
Yeah, I'm sure they are, but I mean, for me, that's an option. In terms of NATO, each summit is just it's like a business plan. Like every year or every 2 years when they meet, they go, where are we at now with this NATO 3.0? Like, because we're looking to disengage. You want us to disengage. So, but it's going to be, I think they're looking at 2035 for the 5% GDP military expenditures and to be more self-sufficient. So would they reach that timetable or before then? I think it's a possibility. I think I think there's an interest in both parties. I think there's economic reality. I think there's outside pressures compelling them to do that, and that's it.
Raul, take it home and then we'll wrap things up tonight.
No, listen. The thing that worries me about all of this is, whether you're talking about Putin, whether you're talking about Iran, whether you're talking about Cuba, whatever. When you corner a rat into a corner, when you put a rat in a corner, or a wild animal, whatever you want to call it, right? They become very upset and very nasty, and they can strike back. It would not surprise me that to suddenly see that there's been these terror cells in Iran here in the U.S. for a while, to see them surface, to see an attempt against our president, a bombing of some sort, the Chinese somehow shutting off our national grid. I mean, the battle space is no longer, kinetic stuff flying back and forth. It's satellites, it's information warfare. And remember that the Iranians had apparently a very robust, cyber warfare capability. The Israelis have been fighting with the Iranians, back and forth, and that's fear for some time. And I'm worried a little bit about that. We might be surprised that they're not as dead. Even when we think they're dead, we think that they're out of the game, that they come back and surprise us with something totally unexpected. I think we need to be prepared for that.
Well, my parting thought for tonight is surveillance state on those interests. We know where they are. We just need, just like with the same with these gangs, these people that are doing these teen takeovers, they're on social media, for God's sake, organizing them. Get that shit done. And that's what it's got to be done. All right. So to our viewers, remember, like and subscribe if you like what you saw tonight, what you heard tonight. And we shall see. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. To everyone, have a good night.
Take care.